All right, welcome to Texans Unfiltered. My name is John Wade. I am the host. I am beyond excited for the guest that I have this week. I'm joined by the host of the Turn Up for Watt podcast. It is, I'm going to say it's Great Britain's #1 Texans podcast. Is that a pretty safe statement to say?
Well, I believe it's the only international podcast. That's certainly what I tell people when they ask. But
The only. So then it's definitely #1. I mean, you got no competition,
yeah,
so it's by default,
that's
right?
it. Yeah. Well, current market at the minute, but we'll see how long that lasts.
And honestly, I hate to say it, but I can't imagine that there's a huge demand right now for Texans content overseas. Wrong, but just the way things are going, I don't see it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's certainly. I think it's peaked. Hard Knocks London games, and yeah, I think we're on the downslope of that now.
So how are we doing? How are you feeling?
Yeah, all right. It's good draft weekend, isn't it? I think it's you start to feel like football's coming back, or you're starting to get into the time where the off season starts to speed up a little, I think. So yeah, it's an interesting weekend. A lot to talk about on that front, and as the team continues to do on and off the field, keeping it pretty interesting.
Definitely. So I have to ask, are you going to have to change the name of your podcast?
Well, it was always meant to be a rhetorical question, really, of why did I do this to myself? So I think it's probably now more pertinent than it's ever been, really, in terms of questionable life choices. I think we've probably got one, if not more than one, sports team that we've dedicated time and effort and sacrifice and put family and things over when you probably shouldn't have. But I suppose there's something that keeps you coming back, isn't there? So yeah, we'll probably keep it. I think it's still pertinent. Maybe if they start winning, then you can maybe change it then. But seems a few years off right now.
Well, you also have that out where you can always just transition to a Cardinals podcast.
Well, yeah, that's true. I suppose,
or even a Steelers,
like
I guess, at this point, because you got T up
yeah,
there. So
yeah.
you have your out. If the Texans ever get so bad, you could just go, you know what? We're about the Watt brothers instead.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I never ever sort of had any delusions of grandeur about wanting to be successful or wanting to be associated with a winner. I've never had that in any sort of sports team that I've followed, so I'm kind of used to this. I think I was pre-prepared for this all, and I think it's you that all like we were saying before we came on. I think when the highs, and inevitably in some form will come back again. When they do, you'll appreciate them more, and I think that's probably one thing that a lot of people have probably taken from the last few months and weeks, a couple of years really. So I think it remains to be pertinent. I think the time actually when I thought about doing it about you was the spiral fumble night in Denver and getting a flight home from Denver the next day with a terrible hangover, a weather delay, sitting in this bar in whatever the airport name in Denver is, and just thought, I don't know why I keep doing this myself, but apart from the COVID year last year, I've done it every year since, and a number before that. So yeah, it's pretty addictive. Is it? Like you get people say married to the game, but I suppose it gets in your blood a bit, doesn't it? I think after long enough.
Yeah, no doubt. It's like this offseason, I've joked around a lot, but I mean, let's be honest. Part of the reason that football is great is the relationships we build with everybody, and having other friends and people, even if it's just individuals that you talk with over Twitter. Like, you can't leave a team, you can't leave all those people, you can't leave those relationships you've met or those family members. I mean, well, my brother did, but forget him. but there's just so much that goes into it that's around the game. Now, the game is, of course, it means a lot to us, and we're hoping that we're going to actually get to go for a team that's a winner, because when you get to have fun with your friends, it's a lot better than when we have to sit there and commiserate with our friends. Saying that, what do you think about the Texans? Do you think they got any better this weekend?
I know that I didn't ever think at any point it was probably possible for them to get, incrementally better that would yield enough talent to make a difference year one. I think if they were going to pick up any guys at any position. And I suppose the assumption, or the broad assumption, would have been that they would have picked up on defense. They seemed to, whether it was the board following that way, John, or whether it was, perhaps the just the availability of the type of guys they wanted. It didn't seem that they did get much better. I don't think. Somebody said it didn't get worse, and I think you're probably right. And I think there was always going to be incremental improvements this off-season, and I know the competition mantra's continually repeated to everybody, but I do think that will go some way, I think, to pushing the fine margins of certain players at certain positions, particularly role players on the roster. And then I think there's also an element of the coaching staff not being any worse than it could, than it had been in previous years. So it's always good to have new additions, and I think maybe the top 2 or 3 guys will potentially have a role at some point. But it's a 2 to 3 year evaluation, I think, of every draft before you can make a sort of definitive conclusion on the quality of it.
Okay. Well, coming out of the draft currently, because instant reactions with draft night are always 100% correct. I mean, we did boo JJ Watt after all. The Texans have the lowest GPA. If you look at all the analysts on how they did for their draft. Now, there's also something out there that's a little bit interesting and that I retweeted. Pretty much this guy went through and he took what teams picked guys that were slotted or projected to go higher. So which guys got the most players that fell. So essentially what that means is if somebody was projected to be drafted in the second, like it was a consensus second round pick, and then he fell to the third, they gave that team essentially a point, like a measurement or whatnot. And according to that, the Texans came in fourth. So all the experts, when they had predicted where these players were going to be drafted, they fell. The Texans actually cleaned up on guys that were falling that should have been drafted earlier by predictions. But those same analysts, after the draft, gave the Texans a failing grade for their draft. Now, that's 2 pretty extreme views. You got one place where it's like fourth, like the Texans are making out like bandits, like they got some good players, and you got a bunch of another ranking where it's saying that the Texans just had a horrible draft. Personally, without discussing the players, where do you feel like the Texans did? Just where do you feel? Because I mean, let's be real, like no one knows yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think I tweeted out over the week. I think draft grades. I know that the done thing, but they're the most pointless. I mean, the pointless kind of to try and grade something on a scale that takes into no account the team's position, number of picks, ranking in the draft, plus their needs, plus all the talent and all the variables that go into all these lottery picks that are draft picks. I just don't see how that means anything to anything that anything that anybody's willing to look into in any sort of level of detail. I just don't see how you could kind of sort of see if ESPN gives you a C minus, then that in fact means a below average outing for your team. But overall I think it's a longer term projection, and it is a projection from day one, and you just don't know. And I think I think draft Twitter and social media as a whole, I think, with the Deshaun episode, there's 2 very different worlds, I think, isn't there? There's the people that are actually making personnel decisions, and then there's people who would like to make personnel decisions. And those worlds are, very, very far apart and have very, very different influences in what creates and shapes their thinking. So they're both entertaining. Draft night is entertaining. But they are abstract for a reason, I think, and they're very separate. So yeah, I think it's so hard to tell. I think if you live and die by the sort of the Twitter sphere of up and downs of your team, then it's you're gonna age pretty quickly, I think. So it's you've just got to be pragmatic and take a longer term view of these guys, and we'll see. I think we're only probably now kind of in a position to assess 2019's draft class, which by all intents and purposes isn't that great, but I would give it another year before you rubber stamp it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I always think it's interesting how the couch is. And, you know, honestly, my belief coming out of this is I think that Nick Casario looked at his draft picks. He said it himself that anything after the second round is just a total crapshoot. Like, I think that's almost his verbiage. I need to find exactly what he said, but that's what
Mm.
he was implying, if nothing else, that you just don't know what third round picks and beyond are going to be. So I believe he wholeheartedly went in there and he didn't think of anything the Texans needed, and he got the best player on his board, whether or not we agree with it or not. And I think that if you take a look at like the guys that fell that we grabbed, that makes sense. Like that lines up. That's what supports that narrative. Like every single draft pick we had was expected to be picked sooner. So in my mind, that just reinforces that Nick Casario just went best player available. And I think that young Ari Gold, James, I think he's over the moon by that. I haven't actually talked to him about it. But last year on this podcast, that's what he screamed out. You just go BPA, BPA every single time. Best player available. Doesn't matter if you have anybody at that position or not. Best player available. Let them compete. Get them on our roster. Let them compete. Even if we have strength of that roster, make a strength even stronger. And I think the Casario completely bought in with that. Now, with that, we're going to go ahead and start talking about our picks. However, I'm going to save Mr. Davis Mills until to be the last one, even though he was the first one we talked about because he's a quarterback. There's a lot of extra drama and a lot of extra baggage and a great big microscope on that poor kid because he's a quarterback, and he was our first pick, even though he was a third round pick. So I think there's a lot more meat with him. But we're going to start off. We're going to skip him. We'll come back around to him because he's probably going to be the meat of the show. So Nico Collins, the Texans actually traded up. They traded that the draft pick that they received from the Rams, I believe, the fourth round pick to move up, go get Nico Collins. What you feeling about him? You excited about him? Do you think he's any good?
I suppose the jury is out for most people. I think for veterans and for rookies coming in of guys that opted out. He took a year out with COVID, so it's there's so much that could happen when you don't do anything for a year. You're going to get rusty in some form or another. So he's not played many games or any games versus the guys he have. So you got to think, logically, he may well be at a disadvantage from that. I think what was quite telling was the trade. I think because effectively we've given up a third round pick to get up there. We've given next year's fourth. LA's we gave a fifth and then and a fourth of our own. So it was quite a hefty price to pay. I think by the Jimmy Johnson draft value chart, it was an overpay. I think would be the thing going by analytics, which I think is interesting because if going from a completely binary numeric kind of look that Casario obviously takes, it kind of flew in the face of that. So he sort of, I think he does it. He takes that approach to a point, and then I think there was perhaps an element of best player available. We just have to do what we need to do to acquire this guy. And I think when you look at him on the surface, he's a prototypical ex receiver. We've not really, bar the years of Andre Johnson, obviously, and then we had some good years of Hop. Before we jettisoned him, I think we've not really had a somebody who can get up and high point the ball and be a red zone threat. And Andrew Johnson was grossly underutilized in the red zone and probably took tens of, if not 30 touchdowns off his name because of the Kubiak sort of preference to run it in the red zone. But I think the measurables are there. He came into the Senior Bowl sort of circa 15 pounds lighter than his playing weight, that was measured in Ann Arbor. So for the Wolverines, so I think he's got everything on paper that you would want for a receiver. He ticks the box, and I think it's been a big need for a long time. You need an X. You can't just fill a wide receiver room with Z types, and that's what we've tried to do. So I think it's definitely a need for the Texans. And I think if you watch his tape, it's just getting up and catching balls. He's maybe not the crispest route runner. Perhaps doesn't quite play at that, or he's not got tape out at that 40 times, but I don't think anybody has tape out of those 40 times this year. But certainly he ticks all the boxes and could be, a really good value addition at that point in the draft. And I think he's a big school pedigree guy who's obviously, maybe not had the best quarterback in Shea Patterson, probably suppressed his numbers to a degree. So I think there's a lot to like there. A 74-inch wingspan is something that you will find your way to the football more often than not. So he's got some great tape, and he's got of the glory catches, but then even a great catch. I put a clip on Twitter of him beating Pat Surtain for a first down to move the chains on a third down tight call, and it just and do the nitty gritty work, and that's something the Texans definitely missed without DeAndre Hopkins. So I think he offers a lot of different types of plays as well in offense.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. He's very toolsy. He ran a 4.45 at a pro day. So he's a 4.5 runner. So he's not slow. He's where he needs to be. Something that's interested with him is he has a 94th percentile catch radius. So I would think that his lowest range of outcomes is he's literally just like a chain mover. Like with that much speed and that catch radius, he may not be the guy, but he could definitely be like option B or option C that just reliably catches the ball and moves the chains. That's what I'm hoping with him. That's what I'm thinking. But because he is a very toolsy, his ceiling is so much higher than that. However, my biggest concern from him from watching the tape that I've seen, and granted I didn't watch that much, is he looks like he plays like a big guy. I was actually surprised that he ran a 4.45 at his pro day, because if you watch his game tape, I'm concerned that he plays a little slow. He doesn't really jump off the field. And granted, that could be part of it being Michigan. Michigan, I don't know what was going on with their passing game. Shea Patterson was absolute trash. And I mean that with as much respect as I possibly can for a kid playing quarterback at Michigan. But yeah, he was not a good quarterback. Who was the receiver that blew up last year that was from Michigan that just completely underwhelmed? I am blanking on his name. I should have known it.
Peoples Jones, was it? Yeah.
Peoples Jones, yes.
Yeah.
Doesn't do anything at Michigan, comes out, gets a decent quarterback, and looks like a completely different player. So I think that could possibly happen with Nico. Hope it does, but we will see. But no, he's definitely, in my opinion, he is probably the strongest pick that we had. Well, maybe him and Roy Lopez. We'll talk about Roy here in a little bit. But of the guys that we picked, like Nico, I could see as being a starting caliber player, and even as a low end starting caliber player, like he's gonna be on the field. I just see that with him. The next pick we had up was pick number 147. That is Mr. Brevin Jordan. He's a tight end. He is a move tight end. How are you feeling about Mr. Jordan?
Well, announced the pick. It was quite a strange experience, wasn't it, really? I didn't think he'd put himself in the firing line. Another perhaps faux pas by the PR staff, I think. There seems to be a lot of them. And then I think, I don't know if you caught the comment at the end as well, Janice. I mean, she's an old, a lovely old lady, but, she's, I can't remember the sort of comment. She just, sort of exclaimed, "Oh, this is wonderful." At the end of the pick, I thought it was quite a strange moment for a family that probably want to keep themselves out of the headlines, I would think, but or out of the limelight, certainly. But Brevin Jordan, I think I was actually live on a podcast when the pick came in, and as I've saying to you at the start, I've probably watched more college football in the last couple of days than I did certainly last year. I think just with the toil of the toll of the Texans filming and games every week, probably you got your kind of fill from it. But I think that my first reaction was exactly that. He's a move tight end. He's an F, and you're seeing people take those guys earlier and earlier every year, and you thought, okay, well, fair enough. So then you watch these bowl game, scores 2 touchdowns, 2-point conversion. You run after the catch, hurdles a DB. He barrels over a couple of guys for a first down. And you think, okay, this guy's got definitely got some production with the ball. If you look at his tape against North Carolina, he was over 100 yards. Same with the game against Louisville as well. even though the Carolina one was a blowout for North Carolina, sorry. And so you definitely got some production. But then when you go and watch the Florida State game, he's lined up as a true tight end on the end of the formation. He seals the edge. Don't get me wrong, a lot of it's combo blocking and helping him with the tackle. But it was obviously a bit more of a physical game plan, and he goes and asserts himself at the line of scrimmage. And I think that's what that's the kind of skill set that you will need to be a true starting tight end in the league. And I think there is you definitely need that if you're just going to think you're just going to run it there and catch passes and leak out late and chip people. You're probably not going to get as many snaps as you would like. So I think seeing the fact that he has got some potential upside, or at least a willingness or an attitude to go and make blocks in the trenches and help his teammates out, I think that only stand them in good stead. And I think this could be very well a start of the end for Kahale Waring if it's not started already. And then I think it might give them an exit plan for Jordan Aikens as well if he can perform, because I struggle to see in the position we're in and the situation of a rebuild effectively what it is. Are you going to pay a move tight end money in your salary cap when you may be carrying some dead cap from a departed quarterback? You may or may not be doing that. So I think it was obviously just best player available. Felt like they couldn't say no. But the more you sort of dug into it, you think, this guy's got a fair bit of upside considering you picked him at the top of the fifth.
I have a question. Why does everybody keep writing off Kahale Warren as the guy that Brevin Jordan is going to replace? Warren, granted, he did have the least playing time out of Barrow Brown and Jordan Aikens. When he was drafted to be more of an inline tight end with the potential to become a pass catcher. Like, Warren was a better blocker when he was drafted. Like, that's why everybody thought that his ceiling was high, is you get a guy that can actually block, that has the potential to turn into a pass catcher. Whereas Brevin Jordan profiles to be a less athletic version of Jordan Aikens. Not as somebody that's going to turn into an inline blocker.
Yeah, no, I don't think. Well, I suppose from the time they drafted Kahale to now, the offense has probably evolved. I mean, quite truly, what the offense will be this year, I don't think anybody knows under David Culley, Pep Hamilton, or Chip Kelly there, but Tim Kelly. And I think I suppose you probably don't know exactly what it is. So, I mean, all the roles or any perception of these guys' roles could be completely redefined by the change in the coaching staff or an evolution of the scheme. I suppose it's a numbers game, isn't it? Because of the position, you may have one or two on the field. You'll likely keep 4 max. You definitely won't keep 5. So if you think Aikens is the most proven out of the remainder, you're probably going to keep your draft pick. That leaves two more spots. You've re-signed Pharaoh Brown, so I mean, they may well do. They may only keep 3. So I suppose it's probably a broad assumption at the minute to think that it, in fact, will be Kahale that moves it. I think he deserves a chance. I think he profiles, as you said, to be a blocker, and you would have some upside. I think the issue was when he got snaps last year, I don't think he necessarily did any great blocking. I remember he absolutely whiffed on one at Chicago. I mean, it was a bad day for everybody, that, but he didn't necessarily kind of endear himself with any kind of blocking ability to his teammates or anybody on looking. So I think he's probably not done enough at this stage. You have to say the Texans were to move on from to probably catch on somewhere else, unless somebody was willing to just take a chance on draft slate alone, and that does happen. But I think you're probably right. You probably want to split them out into 2 separate roles, and actually then if you're going to keep 4 tight ends, can you afford to then keep 3 of them as sort of F kind of move tight ends, and you probably want to keep 2 and 2 as opposed to so you can replace the skill set on the roster. But he may or may not go. But I think and it's a big projection. But if you watch Brevin Jordan, he's throwing passes on trick plays. He was a big part of their offense. You can see the comment if you watch the broadcast version just to get a bit of context. I think it's always useful. You see them sort of talking about in great detail about what he meant to that offense, and And I think it was a decent year for Miami overall. They've started to come back the last couple of years, but he certainly offers something. I think for a 5th round pick, you kind of want that level of intrigue and some production. So he ticks all the boxes there, and I think he doesn't look like he plays 2-4-5. He looks a bit leaner than that. But I think he's definitely got some potential anyway. As you need as many pass catching options, I think, in the skill positions as you can find.
Yeah, no, Brevin Jordan was the consensus number 3. Some people actually had him as the number 2 tight end in this draft. So the fact that he fell, to me, just says that there's a lot of doubt about his blocking. That's just to me, because he is athletic enough. He is able to play the move tight end or the flex tight end, whatever the Texans end up calling it this year. He's able to play. I think he'll be fine as an H-back. And he actually compares physically to like a Hunter Henry type. Like he has potential. Like I think that he's a very solid pick. I do think that it kind of opens up what are they doing with the tight end position. This isn't me saying that I think Warren's going to make the team over Akins. Akins has a track record, but I'm just not saying that it's a foregone conclusion. And then there's the other free agents they've brought in. I think they've signed a half dozen tight ends. I think that it's just interesting to watch. I think it goes back to what I was saying about Caserio, though. He came in and he drafted the best player available on his board, regardless of position. He's just going to drop another guy in to be a part of the competition. And it'll be interesting to see. And it'll be interesting to see what they want to do with their tight ends. Because as much as I like Akins, and I think that with the right situation and the right offense, he would have been a more productive player. He was like 2 years ago, he was the number 1 tight end. Like he was just like top 6 in the NFL for all receivers in yards after catch. Like he is a very athletic individual, and I think that he's a very solid tight end. But we keep waiting for him to break out, and he's now 29. He may be 30 by the time the season hits. Like it just may not happen for him, just because of that age, even though he does have a lot of talent. And Brevin Jordan, actually, very, 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 very similar skill set to him. So I think that'll be interesting. Next up after that, the Texans moved up again to pick another linebacker. What do we have? We have like 50 linebackers on the roster at this point. I'm pretty sure half the team is a linebacker. This is for Garrett Wallow. He's a converted safety to linebacker out of TCU. What do you think about this kid?
So I watched the 2 Oklahoma games, so against the Sooners and State. I don't know what as you said, it was alluded to earlier, and I talked about it earlier today as well, that they were not trading up to get him. And I think when you watch the tape, that's really obvious, because I can't imagine why you would have given up. Was it 3 picks effectively, because you traded up once to 172nd, they were not with Buffalo, and then we traded up again to be not with LA. Is that right, or the other way around? But moving up twice to get yourself in a position. I think this came down to what we were talking about earlier, and Caserio said about there aren't many picks beyond the 5th round that you wouldn't lump in with free agency. And he also said a number of times on different interviews, we didn't want to just be picking players for the sake of it. I think this was kind of the position he got to. So I think the thought process was, we need to move up, because otherwise we're just picking people that don't have a draftable grade, so it makes no sense to him. Again, going back to that binary kind of viewpoint. And then I think they just had a run of guys that they wanted, and they all went. And I think by the time they traded up again because they thought maybe there was one left, and they went. And I think when you watch Garrett's tape, I think TCU is. I don't watch a huge amount of that conference, but he's 6'1". He doesn't look like he plays 6'1". He's got a terrible habit of kind of getting up to the line. Predominantly he plays Mike, but he'll get up to the line and he will sort of peek his head into the hole, and then all of a sudden he's consumed by a blocker. And particularly against Oklahoma, when they got big pedigree guys up front in their trenches, he just looked like a small guy getting consumed, and he looked out of place at times, I thought, on that tape. There's a sort of stretch sort of zone play to the right. He is he goes up to the hole unchallenged, and he just kind of gets his pursuit angle wrong, and the run and the tailback takes it wide, for a 8 or 9 yard gain. And there's a couple of ones, and look, he makes plays when he's free and he's got the chance. Most of the time, in the Oklahoma State game, he does make a TFL right at the start. But then he gets caught out in zone coverage, and you don't know what the rules are unless you're in the huddle and zone coverage. It's particularly how the defender moves between the levels, and that's often how you'll get yards against those kind of looks. But he gets caught out in that. He gets completely annihilated on the broadcast for it. I don't necessarily think it was his fault, but I think what the play did show was a lack of movement skills, lateral ability, and I think he's okay when things are in front of him. I don't think he can play as a Mike. In a 4-3. Look, I think he's Brian Peters, kind of upside. I think he's a special teams guy. He'll come in and do a job. People like him because he'll be, he's a captain. He'll make plays on special teams. He'll run down and tackle, and he can maybe help you.
That was my comp. You read my mind. Like that's what I was going to lead off with. It's Brian Peters redo. Yeah, sorry. I hate to interrupt. Keep going.
No, you're right, and that's it. I think it's just what it is, and I think that's when you start to question the overall quality of the draft class at this point. Because if you think, well, Brian Peters, he was an undrafted free agent, as was Dylan Cole. If this was the skill set that you coveted, which this is why I'm saying I don't think they did, because you could have got that as an undrafted free agent. There were 10 a penny, and there was other guys that went later. And I think at this stage as well, why don't you just take a shot on a defensive back when you're short of them? Rather than a guy who's a bit undersized and a decent defense. But I think he just won't make enough plays, and I just don't think he can read the field well enough. And there's a bit lack of conditioning and a bit lack of agility, I think, just in his lateral movement. But I think he's the type of guy that teams have around.
Yeah. No, I mean I think that there's definitely something to the Nate Hobbs rumor that the Texans wanted Nate Hobbs and that he got the pick ahead of him. Hobbs better fit the profile of all their guys, because just about everyone other than Brevin Jordan that was previously picked. So, okay, 2 players prior. They had connections to the new Texans coaching staff. Like Caserio didn't really seem to be relying on his scouting department so much as the relationship that his coaching staffs have brought up, which is fair. When you're a new GM, you inherit GM's scouting department. They don't get turned over until after the draft. They always let them finish out. That's why over the next couple of weeks, you're going to see quite a few guys in player personnel, college personnel from the Texans get let go. Don't go screaming Easter V, because believe it or not, this time it's not Easter V. This is Caserio 100%. Well, I'm sure Easter V probably still has something, but it's not squarely on him. This is Caserio doing normal GM things when redoing the scouting department and the player personnel department. Like, that's normal. And with that, his new coaches had connections to Nico. They had connections to Mills. Brevin Jordan just seemed like the obvious pick. Like, I'm pretty sure if any of us were picking and we're just going off best player available, we would have picked him. And with that, my whole point, Nate Hobbs fit that mold of having a relationship with Lovie Smith already existing. So I think that was their target. Garrett Wallow, for whatever reason, was their fallback. Not in love with the pick. I'm right there with you. It's Brian Peters at best.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're hoping for with him. And we already have every free agent linebacker signed anyways. If they weren't a tier 1 free agent and they were a linebacker, they're on the Texans right now. So to me, just kind of a head scratcher. Reinforces my belief that Nick went in there best player available. And for whatever reason, that's who they saw as the best player available.
Yeah, I mean, I probably would have rather taken a kicker at that point, because then you could have got Kaimi's contract off the books. I think he's like our 8th or 9th highest paid player this year. So like something like that probably would have been, more beneficial to the longer term roster building than a special teams guy who you could, who are 10 a penny.
Yeah, I'm definitely in agreement. That's one that leaves my head scratching. But, he gets paid the big bucks, and I can't crucify him yet because we got to see. We haven't seen anything about these players. Now we get to the end of the preseason. we can start making judgments then, but at this point we really won't know until the end of the season, and maybe 2 years in a row where the Texans just don't play any rookies. Like that's what this class is kind of sort of screaming towards me.
Yeah.
However, one player that I do like that I'm very, very happy fell to the Texans is Mr. Roy Lopez. Do you have any thoughts on Mr. Lopez?
Well, he's easy to watch on film because he's got the big, long, sort of blonde ponytail sticking out the back. So he's easy to spot, even if you're having to deal with the broadcast, because the Wildcat football is not the most adored, I suppose, across the networks. But I think with I know there's not enough NFL guys called Roy. I think so. Good to get one in the Roy column. I think for all the Roys out there. But I think that the profile, he reminds me of Danny Shelton. I when you watch him play, kind of similar build, not prototypical kind of 6'4", 6'5" guys to sort of carry that 320 plus. I'm sure Danny Shelton's coming in more than 320 these days, but he pushes the pocket. I watched the Colorado game from last year, and I watched the USC game, and he forces a QB hurry and gives an interception against Colorado. And there's a sort of goal line pile, and I tweeted out the clip, and I think it was his agent retweeted it, and you just see him emerge from the pile. He's the only Arizona helmet that you see pushing the pile back, and it's from the sky cam, so it's a great angle for it. I mean, it ends up in a touchdown, but you kind of see the push he's got. There's another clip where he basically flips a USC lineman back, and they've got a good sort of credible history of picking guards and centers and stuff like that. So he's got push, and obviously, ex-wrestler, you heard all that kind of stuff. His dad was a high school coach in Arizona, all that kind of stuff. 36 reps on the bench, on the bench press. He gets sloppy with his pad level, and he loses that leverage that he's got. So you can see in that clip that I put out, he's got functional playing strength, but I don't think his fundamentals lapse at times, and he loses that leverage at the point of attack. So if he could be more consistent, but I think he'll always be a sort of 300-400 snap guy a year. I don't think you can, you certainly can't get any more than that out of him. So, but he does consume 2 blockers. He holds up reasonably well. But there is times where he kind of gets chasing and his footwork gets off and his hips are turned and everything. So I think that there's a lot to like there. At that stage of the draft, could he come and be a run stuffer for you on first and second down? If you get that, then you're arguably it's a high value pick at that point, because it's a skill set that's they're hard to come by. But as you said, before we came on, you can get them towards the end of the draft. So. No, I think the difference between him and Waller, there's flashes there that you can get on board with, and he also see him in a couple of times. Actually, he kind of stutter steps up to the line to try and catch them off guard and then bull rush them. So like you can almost see a role emerging from on some passing downs as well. Whereas where Waller just couldn't see that on the two and a bit games that I watched. So no, I think that you can see a path to production there, and I think that's what you want at late round picks.
No, definitely. He's you can find defensive tackles late in the draft because they've become regulated to a 2-down player. He's somebody that range of outcomes for me. I see him as ended up being at very least a rotational run stopper. That it's like he has a little bit of football savvy. He has a little bit of that dog in him that he might get in there and be a little bit more. But if all he is a run stopper, just let him maintain A gaps in a 4-3, then we're good. Yeah. Especially for where he was picked. You just rotate him in, give your pass rusher a down or 2 off, stop the run a couple of times, rotate him out. And for a 6th-round pick, you can't really ask for more. So I think that he's a very, very solid pick. All right, so this is where I'm sure we're going to end up talking the longest. Mr. 2 last names himself, Davis Mills. Our first pick of the draft, even though he was, pick 67 in the draft. I've seen everything from he is a wasted pick to he is the next starting quarterback of the Houston Texans. Oh boy. Yeah. This is why he's going to be a little bit of a fun conversation. I'm going to let you talk first before I throw my opinion in it. So what are you thinking about Mr. Mills?
Yeah, well, I think when you first see the pick and you see the position it is, it's your first pick in the draft. You think, well, it's a one of the final, if not, the last few nails in the coffin of the whole Watson saga. It feels like a lifetime, but it's only been a couple of months, isn't it? So that's your kind of first inclination, and then I suppose when you see all the kind of stuff about being top recruit, pro style quarterback, but he has had 2 big knee injuries. He's missed significant time. He's only got 11 starts.
Well, one was the meniscus. I mean, I've had a meniscus injury. I've also had an ACL injury, and I don't wish a meniscus on anybody. But on the scale of surgical knee injuries, well, that's the low end. So
yeah, still, I mean, yeah, and I think he's got a level of pedigree. And he's obviously to be accepted at Stanford. They're looking for a very specific type, very specific background, and you're going to have to be able to handle the academic GPA point of view from it, as well as your playbook. And you're expected to balance them in equal measure. So I think there's a lot there to like. I mean, when I went through, I think I watched about 6 or 7 of his games. Just to try and get a feel for what he is. And I think if you think he's classic pocket passer, he shuffles well with his feet, very limited wasted movement. His biggest probably plus is the fact that he anticipates throws at the point of release. The play hasn't even developed yet, and he trusts that. Now, that's also his biggest negative, because he throws some terrible, terrible interceptions into some terrible situations. He doesn't judge by any means or stretch. He just does not diagnose certain coverages, particularly cover 4. That was a couple of times he got called up on that. The run, I think, was one of the QB school videos they're running 4 verts against a cover 4, and it doesn't check it down, kind of basic stuff. So he's got a lot of tools in his armory. I think he's a decent athlete. He's not immobile. He's able to scan the field. You can see, again, the QB school pointed this out. There's a good couple of 4-part clips if you've not watched it. You can see him, his head scanning. He moves safeties with his eyes, so kind of stuff there's a lot of stuff there that's probably guys don't get to year 1 and year 2 in the league. Throws some nice passes. I think he probably, I think if his deep ball accuracy had been better, I think Sammy Fioco probably would have gone higher than the 6th round or 5th round or whenever he went. He was a bit over reliant on him. But I think when you watch, I think it was the Notre Dame tape. I think he's got 46 attempts in that in 2019. And you see, and that probably kind of gives you an idea of what his ceiling potentially is, because you've got a situation there where he needs to be supported by a run game. He needs to be supported by a good cast around him. And I think, out of those 46 attempts, he didn't throw an interception that day, but it showed it wasn't his formula. And there was a lot of passes that bounced off the turf. And he's and there's regularly his completion percentage drops below the sort of dreaded 60%, which you can't really afford to have in the pros. So there's a lot there, but there's also a lot to coach up, and I think it's a tough challenge. I think the Texans coaching staff are going to face off in a year where you're going to tank. How do you develop a guy who you might be doing the team damage as well as him damage that needs game time? And I don't know what the answer to that one is.
Yeah. The biggest, first off, everybody needs to kind of cool their jets on him. He's a 3rd round pick.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a little bit that you've got to kind of look at the philosophy that the Casarios, I think, is bringing over from the Patriots. Every 3 years, the Patriots drafted a 2nd or 3rd round quarterback. You build up a backup quarterback, and then you trade him. Now, I think that Casario, similar kind of mindset with him. The guy is probably not the future of the franchise. And he's not most likely going to be our starting quarterback. If he ends up being our starter quarterback, that's either 2 things happen. He lived up to number 1 recruit billing, which, he might. I mean, it could happen. Or 2, something absolutely drastically horrendous happened during training camp, and he's the only quarterback left standing. He's a 3rd round pick. We have to keep that in mind. And the reason that he was a 3rd round pick is he needs to play more. He just needs to play more. Now, there's a lot of analysts out there that were really high on him if he went back to school. He goes back to school for another year. He could have potentially moved up and end up being a top 5 next year. He has the pedigree. He has the physical talents, but he doesn't have the game experience. This is why he was a 3rd-round pick this year. How many games? I think he's started 11 games. Is that correct? Only 11 games in college?
Yeah, I think 11 games until right about that anyway. I mean, it's a small sample size, I think, and he's there's, as I said, there's a lot to like on his tape, but it's just how does he develop at the next level, because he's not even developed at college, I think, and that's clear. It's inconsistent. I think the biggest thing I took from it was there's good plays, there's good series, but there isn't a single game you can watch that I've seen, certainly, or heard of, that it's 4 quarters of good football, and that's the kind of level of consistency he's going to need to find. That's at least not harming his team by bad interceptions.
Yeah, Ryan just nailed it. Started 11, played 15. Thank you so much, Ryan, chat. And with that, like, you see glimpses of physical ability, and you even see sometimes the glimpses of him learning to process, but can he take that next step? And the trait that he has to develop, and I don't know if he can actually develop it in the NFL, as he may end up playing scared, is can he learn how to be that conservative, aggressive thrower? Can he take the risk with the throws and not be careless with the ball, a la Jameis Winston, but, take shots, push the ball down the field? And throw a couple down the field, but he's not pushing it down the field. He's not putting pressure on the secondary. And I don't know if that's play calling at Stanford or him needing to take another step. Now, if he's able to take that next step, then yeah, we'll probably have an absolute steal. Now, if he doesn't take that step, then backup quarterback. Like, that's a very safe bet for him. But we shouldn't be putting this pressure on him that he's going to be anointed the savior or the starter or the replacement for Deshaun, because I don't think that's any of those.
Yeah, no, I hope not. I think there's definitely an issue with his deep ball accuracy. You see him kind of pull the ball down and check it and pump fake and maybe not trust his eyes as much as he should do at times. And then other times he doesn't. So I think he's probably just not had enough games at that level to know what he can and can't try. I think, and he's got a lot of nice movement skills as well. There's a couple of stuff where he just evades pressure nicely, just with a kind of just small step to the side. And I think as well there's that play where he gets picked off and he chases a guy down and knocks him out of bounds. And to me that just shows he's a competitor and he wants to win football games. And he put himself above the team in that sense. To quote a Caserio wisdom. So there is a lot there to like. And I think it's a shame from, in the situation in terms of having the cloud of the Watson situation hanging over. He's going to have that, just like Caserio's had that coming into his race. He's not got an even footing to start off with. And I think he's lucky he's got Tyrod Taylor there. And ideally you want Tyrod Taylor, if that's going to be the way and the outcome, to play all the games and him just to sit and watch and learn and get as many snaps in pre-season as he can. You get a good idea of it. And then in case of an emergency, could he come and spot fill for a couple of series or close out a couple of games, But I think there's a lot there to like, but there's a lot of bad throws, a lot of bad decisions, a lot of bad sacks he takes. And it just screams of somebody of inexperience. But there is certain things like hitting crossers, dropping balls in buckets, over the different lines of defense. He does that already. So I think the fact that he is potentially, and you don't want to sort of kind of assume, but you think he's going to have a mental advantage over a lot of quarterbacks, just with the environment he's been in and probably the standards he's been held to. I think in terms of that program, you think that's going to stand him in good stead, because that's the biggest thing that challenges a lot of guys when they make the step up. Is not the physical side of it. It's being able to learn the playbook and all the kind of checks and keys and stuff. And he said in an interview on the Stanford website, our protections are actually more complicated than some of the ones in the pros. And so I think the fact that he's aware of that and understands it, I think shows quite a mature guy for his age. So, if this pays off in any way, as you said, even if it's just the form of flipping him for a pick. And I think there's a number of players Caserio signed. Desmond King, for example, on that contract. He's a prime, deadline trade. There's a couple other guys on there as well. Philip Lindsay, maybe that you could maybe flip for picks in the trade once the season's kind of gets out of hand. And I think looking at the roster, it's got a very good chance of that happening. Then he could be flipped in a year's time or 2 years' time. So I think it's high payoff. Again, it comes back to that sort of analytic, kind of very kind of clear matter of fact thinking from Caserio. But I think that people, because they've got the situation of Watson, will look at it differently if you just had picked him up anyway. I think he's got that to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, he has a lot of potential, and I do appreciate the moxie and his pushback when people asked him about how many games he played. He talked about the virtual games and all the walkthroughs and stuff they did at Stanford. So I give him credit for that. Like he's got a little bit of moxie to him. He's got a little bit of confidence. But I don't know. He just doesn't have a lot of games, and that's what's concerning. And to tell you the truth, like sometimes with quarterbacks in college, I would rather see more interceptions. He has a streak of 5 games in a row in last season where he didn't throw any interceptions. He threw all 3 of his interceptions in the UCLA game, all 3 for the season. So, and the reason I say that is it's easier to teach a quarterback to be more conservative than it is to teach aggression. You can't teach aggression.
Yeah.
So timid quarterbacks become career backups. And I don't know if he's a timid quarterback or not. That's my problem. Just based on the tape out there, like I don't know if he's timid. The other thing that's really hard to learn is touch, and he has that in spades. Like he actually can put good touch on the ball. Like he can, and I think he can clean up his mechanics some. He drops his elbow a little bit too much. He's not Pat Mahomes. Pat Mahomes can have shitty mechanics and still rocket the ball. But for the rest of the human quarterbacks, they've got to have pretty solid mechanics, and his needs some working. But if he gets that the arm strength is there, that he has more than enough arm strength for the NFL. Like you'd be a plus arm strength passer in the NFL. So again, lots of potential there, but it's all potential. He didn't have enough games to really say definitively what we have. And with that, and not trying to trash him, I'm just saying everybody needs to manage. Yeah. And Ryan Chat points out that his receivers also had a bad case of the dropsies. But I'm going to say that with Mills. Shoot, I just lost my thought. I should have stayed out of chat.
Yeah, I know.
Isn't that fun sometimes?
Well, I was going to say that I think that a couple of things that I always look for in college, because the hashes are spread out, so the type of throws and the angle of the throws often change a bit. But what doesn't change and what the hardest bit is to do is actually get throws up the boundary. Now he's go routes, he's posts. He's not very good at finding guys like that. I think everybody said watch the UCLA game, and I couldn't believe he airmailed one to the guy who's just been drafted by Dallas. He airmailed one and missed them by about 10 yards, when it was a big point in the game where they needed points, and and they probably would have won it at normal time if he'd have found them there. But he does make great throws. He throws a lovely sort of fade route into the corner of the end zone against, I think it was Colorado in 2019, and he shows, apart from the deep ball, he shows that he can make a lot of throws, and he can make them on the boundary. He throws one against Washington as well, which I think the guy actually drops it again. I think it was on the QB school one, but it gets called a catch. But it is a phenomenal throw, and then it's one of those ones where you see it and you think, well, I think this guy's maybe got it at the pro level, but it's raw materials at the minute, and it's going to be Pep. If Pep Hamilton can make a starter out of him, it will be his best achievement to date, and it'll very much overshadow the Justin Herbert and Andrew Luck schoolings that he's done in previous.
Oh, definitely. I think it's a good situation, and it's great that we have Pep Hamilton to have with Mills. But we'll see. And the question that I was going to ask is, granted, we keep talking about Mills and his potential, and he even if he plays to his potential, he's not going to start this year again unless something catastrophic happens. But how does that make you feel about Nick Caserio, where he took a draft pick, essentially used it on a roulette chip, as I think what somebody on Twitter said? Like, it's a gamble. It's definitely a gamble. It could pay out, and it's actually a pretty safe bet that it's going to pay out something, even if it's like a third round pick. Versus drafting somebody that could come in and play this year. It was pick 67. There was maybe not starter quality, but this year type players that were still available.
Yeah, I think there was a couple of interior guys went at the back end of the second. Boogie Basham went at the Bills late on. I think, if somebody like that had been on the board, I think, yeah, he goes defense. Yeah, I think from the point of view, if you think, well, I mean, looking at this roster, in all likelihood, you're going to be picking in the top 3 or 4 next year, gives you a chance to actually get, a more, well, in theory, a more legitimate starter type player. Can he do that? But it's not to say you can't do that with Milk. If you look at Prescott, if you look at Kirk Cousins, Russell Wilson, it's been done, and it's been done actually almost slightly more regularly in the last sort of 5-10 years than it had been in the sort of 5-10 previous. So it could be the highest payoff, and I think that's probably what he's looked at it as. But I think, yeah, could you have gone the guy Asai, or is it from Texas? Is it the outside linebacker? But I don't really think he's a fit for the system. Was there any clear I think if there was a clear number 1 defender there that would have been a day 1 starter, I probably think Caserio goes there. I think it was just the fact that the value matched up with with the upside and the grade, I think, and it was just a perfect storm for him to go. And I think it was Mark Berman quoted him or a family member saying that they were celebrating as the Kyle Trask pick came in, as the Kellen Mond pick came in, because Caserio had already phoned them and says, look, if you're still there, we're taking you at 67. So he was obviously their guy. It probably shows an element of the Pep Hamilton influence and his insight into the building, how much actually, if it all been different, if Tim Kelly might not have been kept on for Watson's sake, perhaps he would be, and by all accounts, he's getting coordinator money, so to be a QB coach. So I think he's played a big part in that, and he'll definitely be his mentor. But yeah, you've kind of got hope you don't see him in year 1. I think people probably hoped that about Watson, and then he came on halfway through week 1. So wait and see. But I think there's a lot there to like, and it could go 101 ways, just like every one of these picks. But even if he comes in and gives you a TJ Yates kind of win late in the season, Monday night at Cincinnati, all those kind of good memories that Yates provided, if he even plays that sort of role, I still think it's a decent pick, because winning games is what it's all about at the end of the day.
No, I'm actually in agreement with you. One of the things that I just wanted to scream at people is we're not playing for this year. This year,
no.
This year's a reset year.
Just potentially next year as well.
Potentially next year as well. But this year is definitively a reset year, unless by some miracle Deshaun comes back. And at that point, do you even want him back? And we're not going to have time for that conversation because we're at 58 minutes. But I'm entirely in agreement. We're not playing for this year. So you take a risk on him. If he ends up being something, and ends up being something special, he ends up being a Dak Prescott, he ends up being a mid-level starting quarterback, then it puts you in a position where next year, when we're drafting in the top 5, because we're going to be drafting in the top 5, we don't necessarily have to take a quarterback, because there's not a guarantee that. We talked about it at length prior to this. Top 5 quarterbacks don't really end up that well. Like it just doesn't happen. Usually the guys that are good quarterbacks right now, the top 3, Pat Mahomes wasn't a top 5. Russell Wilson wasn't even a first rounder. And Aaron Rodgers, 18. Like, he was picked 18, sat for 2 years. And of course, Deshaun. And we all know Deshaun's story here by heart. So yeah, top 5 quarterbacks, they aren't the surefire home runs that everybody makes them out to be. However, top 5 defensive players, top 5 skill position players, sometimes those guys are. So just a lot more flexibility if this is a guy that they have a lot of hope in. And you know what? If he turns out to be what most of us expect, and I'm sure even what they expect, nothing more than a backup quarterback, they can still pick their quarterback and then flip him in a couple of years going forward and have competition, because it sucks, but it's not easy to draft a Deshaun Watson. Like if it was easy to draft a Deshaun Watson, he would have never ended up on the Texans, because he would have been the first pick overall. Like, you just don't know what to expect when you draft a quarterback.
And I think that's why the team, and I'm probably a bit a romanticist in this sense, but I think the team has to do everything it can to try and, a final roll of the dice, get people around the table and see if they can solve that situation. Legalities aside, and obviously you'll need to wait to the conclusion of that. But I can't see any circumstance in the medium to long term of this football franchise of being better off if you ship four. If you ship four, will always be in the shadow of that. You'll always be remembered as the team of that. If he goes on to have a successful career, you will always be remembered as the team you had the most invaluable thing in all of pro sports, and you messed it up for reasons nothing to do with football. And look, he might take 50-60% share of that blame as well, for all the kind of off-field stuff. But I think you've got to find a way to try and bring him back in house if you can. I think it's probably too far, reading between the lines. But I think you'd much rather, because everything matters again instantaneously if he walks in the building, and you could get all these picks, and Cleveland did it, tried it number 3 or 4 times, and you could get all these picks and hit on only 30%, which is about the average.
Not even sure they hit on that many.
Yeah, and be no better off, and you could be no better off, or you could hit all these picks and you'll still be a quarterback away, and we're in the same position that we've been in before. So, you just, I think you've got to hope that there's some way in some form of recompense that they can do. But I think if and I wrote an article about that on the website podcasttexas.com the other week there, and I think if the McNairs are true custodians of Houston, they would do right by the alleged victims. If they have been done wrong, they would do right by their quarterback and provide the team as a platform for rehabilitation, and for right doing, for all the causes and all the people affected, and they would see that through. But I think that's probably too much. Too much bravery for a man of Cal, who, if you saw him speak today at the fire department, shirt hanging, I think they must have had some spare BMAC jerseys going around for 55. But you see him going and I think the way, if you watch John, if you watch the way his wife, how she's now managed to get a very prominent role. If you watch how she's just watching him as if she's just told him exactly what to say, and he's regurgitating it. It's a sorry state of affairs. So when you see there at the centre of it all, it doesn't fill you with hope that this team could be run in a manner which, they're already acting against Caserio by the mess they gave him. Caserio somewhat unknowingly. So, despite Caserio being, a professional, and I think everybody loves to praise him, and, I'll wait till 18 months down the line before you can make any sort of form of assessment of what he's done, beyond his light blue gilet that he was sporting on rounds 2 and 3. But I think I think there's dysfunction at the top, and that breeds down, and I think that may be our biggest undoing in all of this. So that's just something you need to bear in mind, I think, when all these decisions are made, that it's not all on the surface.
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, we've all expressed our opinion of Cal. Hannah McNair probably does. I mean, yeah, he's made comments too, and that whole story, their whole story is just a little. I'm just going to leave it like that. However, Nick Caserio, did anybody don't forget to tell him that dark blue is our color, not light blue? Like, I mean, dude's going to be on TV in front of the entire nation, and that was not the right color blue for him, because that's going to be a meme. All right. Well, thank you again so much. We are at an hour and 5, and yet, I thought I was going to run out of energy, and I thought it was going to be tough to actually get through it tonight, because it's been such a long weekend, and I know it's got to be like, what, 2 a.m. there, 3 a.m, 4 a.m.
Yeah, getting late. But I think it's as you said right at the top. I think it's about it's about the people and the tailgates, and as I said before we came on, I think we're probably going to need each other a bit this year. So it's
Yeah.
try and make sense of all the madness at times. So and and I keep maintaining I don't think we've hit rock bottom yet, and I don't know when that'll be. But I think there's strength in numbers and some of this stuff, so you gotta keep your head above water, big time.
It's going to be once the trade goes through and we don't win any games. Like, you thought the D. Hopkins highlights last year were painful.
Yeah, yes, see nothing
yet.
Oh
man, we ain't seen nothing. We're going to need everybody. And again, yeah. But thank you so much. Been a wonderful guest. Made tonight doable. And made it, I think, a great show. So thank you so much. Let them all know where to find you, where to listen to you. You've got a great pod. They definitely, if they're listening to us, they should definitely be following you as well. But yeah, tell them where they can find you.
Yeah, so it's the Turn Up for What podcast, and you can check us out at podcasttexans.com. Write a number of sort of articles and columns on there, just when inspiration strikes, and you can get us at Podcast Texans on Twitter, Facebook, and recently got into the interesting world of Instagram as well. So yeah, thank you very much, John, for having us on, and to all you guys that supported me through doing this last couple of years, much appreciated. So just glad I could come on and give you some time back, repay the favor a bit.
Definitely. Whenever you want to stay up late, just let me know. We'll try and figure out how to squeeze you in. I always appreciate you when you're here, or appreciate talking to you because it's the first time you're here, even though we've talked a couple times in the past. Chat, y'all, thank you for bearing with us every week. I'm always impressed by how many people actually show up in chat. Y'all make it worth doing. I know some people were giving Ryan a hard time for distracting me earlier, but it's okay. It's okay. It makes it a lot more fun. There's a reason why we continue to do these live instead of recording them and making them clean. We want to be authentic, and a big part of being authentic is y'all in the chat. So thank you so much. And to everyone listening, again, thank you for being with us here every week. We're going to need each other. It's going to be a tough season. It's going to continue to be a tough off season. Unfortunately, I think he's right. We haven't hit rock bottom yet. Going to get there. We're going to need each other. But it's going to get better. It has to, right? Y'all, thank you so much. We'll see you next week.